Hi everyone, Something Time Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new Chat Pile album, God's Country. This is the debut full-length LP from Oklahoma noise rock and sludge metal outfit Chat Pile. Yes, this is their first LP, but they have been turning heads for a few years now, as they had a couple of really great and promising EPs that dropped back in 2019. Pretty sure one of them ended up on my EPs of the year list. And it's been so long since those dropped, I actually forgot the band was still active until I began to hear teasers to this new LP, which as I've dived into it has turned out to be one of the most intense and harrowing loud rock albums of the year. And what's funny is that it doesn't do anything too crazy or complicated to make that happen. Part of this record's power is really in its simplicity, and with that simplicity it achieves greatness among these 9 completely crushing and harrowing tracks. And there's a fair amount of variety among these songs too. Whether you're talking about the monstrous and growling bass lines on the opening track Slaughterhouse, which are paired with these sinister horror movie guitars, pounding and primal drums as well. There's all the obliteratingly heavy riff passages all over the song Why, the eerie and cavernous post-punk guitars on Pamela, the whirlwind of deafening noise rock riffs that level everything in their path on Tropical Beach Incorporated, as well as Wicked Puppet Dance. Don't Care If I Burn is one of the sickest and most unsettling spoken word pieces that I think I've heard in a while. The tone of this one as well is absolutely not expected, especially given just how visceral and cathartic everything else on the record is, which is why it sticks out so much. But I think Chat Pile proves on this one just because it's quiet doesn't mean it's not depraved. Also, watch out for the blood-curdling scream in the second half on this one. Finally, there is the 9-minute closer Grimace Smoking Weed.jpg, which, yes, like many other tracks here, has loads of rumbling riffs, but this song really for me comes down to its theatrical performance. Of course that comes through on the vocal and lyrical side, but I'll get into that in a minute. There's also the production that I would like to compliment on this one too. The riffs and bass tones all over this thing are so goddamn thick, very rough and coarse as well. It feels like getting hit with a 3-ton cinder block. The vibe of this record sonically reminds me of groups like the Jesus Lizard or Godflesh a little bit. Lots of Steve Albini related projects too, Big Black, Shellac. The drums, as I mentioned earlier, are so punchy, hard-hitting, and clear, and much of the time the vocals and lead guitars have a very nice placement and EQ in the mix as well. The performances across this record are very raw and very organic. Whole thing feels like you're listening to the band perform this live, either in an abandoned warehouse or a factory floor. Now let me dive into the vocals a little bit, which are just as blunt and as straightforward as everything else here, but in my opinion they really are like the selling point of the record, the crown jewel of the LP, as they are so deranged and manic and out of control, to the point where the psychotically suicidal episode depicted on the closing track is so intense and so real, it's a little difficult to sit through. The opener Slaughterhouse is nearly as horrifying, but for different reasons. The shrill howls of hammers and grease send a chill up my spine, plus all the lyrical descriptions of the removal of skin or wearing a different skin. But for all the madness portrayed on many of these tracks, there's a lot of clarity on this LP too. Whether you're talking about the lyrics that dive a bit into capitalist greed on Tropical Beaches Incorporated, or the song Why, which I think tackles one of the greatest horrors of our modern society, and that is homelessness, and illustrates that homelessness is this really ugly thing that we are just made to accept as normal. Something that can't be helped, and if we see someone who is homeless, it is most definitely due to a personal or moral failing of some sort. This preposterous presumption is attacked with simply the question of why. Why do people have to live outside? We have the means and the resources to change that as a society if we wanted to, and yet we don't. Plus, I love that this is the topical focus for the song within the entirety of its runtime. Usually when issues like this are being addressed in a track, this will come up and then we'll sort of jump on to something else. But no, for Chat Pile, and rightfully so, this is something that is worth focusing intensely on and singularly on, at least for the duration of the song. With the track Pamela, the vocals are a bit more buried and underdelivered than I would have liked, especially during the passages where the guitars get quite heavy. But still, this song serves as a kind of creepy breather that adds to the overall flow of the record. The mutant growls and grunts all over Wicked Puppet Dance are a treat as well, with the freaking echo making it kind of call out into the abyss, and some of the more guttural vocal passages have almost a death metal tone to them too. Some of the plotting and mid-paced riffing on the song Anywhere does get a little tedious after a while. Still, some of the sickest guitar work and vocal passages come through in the first half of this track, and generally I see this song as a pretty smart execution of some very obvious Slint influence. The Mask also features some of the most menacing screams on this record throughout, plus those refrains of "Line up the animals!" It's all quite a shock to the system. In an extreme sense, which is a great contrast to the following track that I mentioned earlier, I Don't Care If I Burn, which is just as hard and intense emotionally, but delivered in a completely different way. Now, this whole record emotionally and vocally does come to a peak on the closing track that I mentioned earlier. The play-by-play and back and forth on this one, emotionally and narratively, between the unhinged screams and just the constant combating, just the fighting off of these very dark and very disturbing thoughts. Yeah, it is genuinely twisted and kind of triggering, I imagine, for people who have had similar feelings, similar experiences. May have to warn some of you guys on this one because it really truly is a lot. Like, it barely even feels like a performance in any way whatsoever. It sounds like somebody is having some kind of like mental breakdown, but just like riffs are going on in the background. I suppose in that sense there is a raw intensity to the singing on this LP that isn't too unlike a project like Suicide, for example. Obviously Chat Pile and Habits, totally different genres of music, but there is something kind of similar there. There is overlap there in terms of something incredibly dark and just really frightening being tapped into. Overall, I really loved this LP. There were a few tracks that had passages that sort of lulled for me. On top of it, it does feel like a debut in that the band comes off as still kind of, you know, learning what their sound and style entirely is, really still in this like semi-incubation and explorative phase where they could potentially grow into more sounds and more versatility in the future. Fingers crossed, I hope so, because that would really only improve their sound and the flow of future records. But with that being said, as this currently is, it's fantastic, it's amazing, it is pummeling, it is quite a ride, and one that I would highly recommend so long as you're not too faint of heart or anything. Feeling a strong 8 on this one. Transition, have you given this record a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Chat Pile, forever.